Good morning, everyone. We'll plan to get started in just a minute. We're going to allow everybody time to get into the meeting. All right, let's get started. So this is our last breakout session for our virtual Champions for Young Children Symposium. And I'm very excited that you guys are here to hear this wonderful session by Dr. Jennifer Hall from Clemson University on promoting relationships and resilience using child-centered play therapy skills in the everyday. I think this is a really timely session, and I think you guys are really going to enjoy it. Before we get started, I have a couple housekeeping things to share with you. One, we will use two features for you to be engaged. One is the chat box, and that's for general questions or sharing resources or general comments. We'll ask that you put any questions about the session in the Q&A box, and those will be answered at the appropriate time. It might be at the end, so hang in there. You know, we'll get to them. If we don't get to them, we'll make sure that we get back with you about those. The session is being recorded. The attendees are on mute and their videos are not on. And we will put the recording on our YouTube channel maybe next week once we figure out how to use our YouTube channel, but it'll be there. And our helpful chat monitor is going to put a link in the chat for where you can access handouts for this session and other sessions for that are in the Champions program. As a reminder, if you signed up for CEUs or child care training credit, you must view this live session in its entirety, and you're already on, so just hang in there. And if you have any questions, please reach out to scic@mailbox.sc.edu. So without further ado, I'll let Dr. Hall take over.
Thank you, I appreciate it. Good morning, everybody. I hope you're doing well today. I'm just going to go to our agenda. So a little bit of background about myself before we get started. I am a registered play therapist and licensed professional counselor, but right now I do work at Clemson University, and I am a professor in the counseling program there, focusing mostly on school counseling, but actually a lot of my background has been working with children and adolescents in the mental health capacity. And I did work at the domestic violence shelter in Charlotte for a little while, where I was able to do some of this play therapy. So you'll see some references to trauma and things like that. So that is something that I'm really passionate about, as well as play therapy, and was lucky enough to kind of incorporate both of those while working at the shelter. I also was a special education teacher for a while in elementary school, and a school counselor. So I've done a lot of different types of jobs working with children, which I think has helped give me a really good comprehensive view. And I also have my own daughter who's 4.5, so I often get to use some of these play therapy things every day with her. But a lot of what we're going to talk about today comes from Dr. Gary Landreth's work, and that's the book right there. It's kind of like, you know, the manual for child-centered play therapy that a lot of institutions use when training people in play therapy. And I actually was trained at UNC Charlotte at their play therapy program. They have a wonderful program there. So a lot of this stuff is going to come from there, and I hope that you find it helpful. I know that Heather shared with me some of your backgrounds and where you all work, so I'm hoping to be able to present this in a way that's helpful for you all and able to use it. That's kind of what we're going to go over today. as I mentioned, I did want to kind of touch on some trauma, especially particularly in the environment that we're in right now with the pandemic and now children going back to schools and daycares, and how that's really impacted them over the summer and throughout the spring when it first hit. So I would add that to this list of ACEs, but the first ACEs study was done back before this one, and it was done on adults, and they found that lots of factors, in fact, 1 in 4 adults have really been impacted by traumatic events in their life. And these are things that are what we call developmental trauma or type 2 traumas, where they're kind of ongoing things that really impact the child throughout their growth and development over time. It's not just like a one-time event like a hurricane or 9/11, although those can like layer on top of these issues, of course. So I think we need to keep this lens in mind when we're working with children, particularly in schools and childcare settings, because likely they're going to be exposed to some of these things. And also through the ACEs study, they found out that if they're exposed to one, it's more likely they've been exposed to multiple things. And so that increases their ACEs score. So these are just some common ACEs or adverse childhood experiences that you will find in the children's lives often in conjunction, like I said, with the pandemic. And so these traumas then, as you can imagine, had various impacts on the children, both from a mental health perspective, but also, academically and just attendance and other things, mainly behavior as well. So a lot of times, particularly in classrooms, we'll see behaviors that might typically be labeled as like ADHD type behaviors, inattention, fidgeting, unable to pay attention, and all of these things, because, as we know, that toxic stress that's caused by these ACEs impacts their brain and their brain development. So when their brain stem is kind of on that fight, flight, freeze response, that's really what their brain is focusing on, and it's really having a hard time to regulate and use coping skills or think before they act. If they're upset and angry, they might just do something impulsive, and we might look at it as a behavioral problem, and really there might be some kind of underlying things going on with the child. So I think it's just really important to keep these things in mind when we're working with children. And you might see some of these things, more behavioral things happening with children that are coming back to your settings, even maybe if before they weren't exhibiting those things due to, maybe being at home and the impacts of that in the pandemic. And so what we do know from trauma research is that really the critical factor is having relationship and having just one loving, consistent, supportive adult in the child's life. And so that's really what we can do to kind of help support children and build resiliency. And so that's kind of how the resiliency and relationship tie together, because resiliency is often dependent upon relationship and important adults in children's lives. And so really this is just kind of reiterating that it's the number one factor for those who have experienced ACEs, and really having that model of a supportive, caring relationship helps promote self-regulation and resilience, not only because the child has a model for what that looks like and how to communicate in a positive way, but also just feeling safe and having this thought that there's someone there that really does care about me, and no matter what I tell them or how I act, they're still going to care about me. So when we use kind of these trauma-informed approaches where we use a lot of relationship building to help with resiliency, these are some things that we might see in the school and childcare settings. So we would see reductions in the behavioral outbursts and referrals, absences, dropouts, if there's any bullying or harassment going on at older levels, and also needs for other services. And it tends to improve, their brain's ability to open up and really use that cognitive capacity to learn and understand things. And of course, with the behaviors and things being more minimal, the teachers feel a little bit more satisfied and less stress at their jobs too, which is always a positive for the teachers and the students. So really, this is really what children need. So this is really from a trauma-informed lens as well. But we need to provide them with the emotional and physical safety in an environment that's predictable. So all those routines and structures that you have in place, boundaries and things of that nature, really help them to feel safe and secure, as most of you know that. Modeling these healthy relationships and boundaries and setting limits. Of course, being encouraging and supportive, being patient, and allowing them space to kind of express how they feel in a way that's safe and positive for them. So why are we going to use play therapy? I don't know if you have some thoughts, but if you do have some thoughts, I'll let you kind of type them in the chat, and then I'll kind of go into a little bit more about play therapy. So based on what I've said so far, why might we use play therapy to help build relationship and resilience? Play disarms fear, yeah. Natural. It's the work of children and they're good at it, most definitely. Building trust. Yeah, those are all great ideas. Children take the lead, it's more comfortable for them. Yeah. So I'm just, express emotions. So I'm gonna go, I love all your answers you're popping in there. I'm reading them, they're great. I'm just gonna go into a little bit about the play therapy specific research so you have a little bit of background about that. But there's studies, of course, done. Play therapy, founded by Dr. Landreth, was started back in the 70s and really started researching then. So it's relatively, quote unquote, newer than a lot of other typical mental health therapies. But it's been shown that it's better, children do better on all kinds of outcomes, both internalizing, so those anxiety, depression, those kind of things that you might not notice about a child that they're feeling, but also externalizing. So conduct issues, behavior, those kind of issues as well. So it's been effective in treating both of those. And also humanistic approaches, which is where children take the lead and the client takes the lead, are actually produce greater effects, because there are lots of different types of play therapy. The one I'm talking about today is the child-centered, where you're right, the children take the lead. But some types of play therapy also are more directive, and they kind of come into the sessions with activities or ideas and structure, whereas this is more open to, we actually open the session with, this is your playroom, and in here you can play with these things in most of the ways you'd like to. And we let the children decide how they want the session to go. And so, of course, it was more effective than no treatment and alternative treatments. It's been proven to be more effective with diverse populations of children, which is really important. And we need to obviously have those considerations when we're providing therapy. So it's a culturally sensitive approach because it is up to the child to decide and lead and structure the play. And so it's a fully accepting environment for the child where, maybe other places in the world, they don't feel that. Even young children have this understanding of differences and how some people are treated differently because of the way they look or things like that. And so in this, setting, children are really free to be who they are without that fear. And so it's been effective with different marginalized populations as well. And so what I wanted to do today is talk a little bit about child-parent relationship training and child-teacher relationship training, because I think that's really where this stuff's going to benefit you all, because you're obviously not trained therapists necessarily that are going to go in and I'm going to teach you how to do play therapy in an hour and you're going to address, mental health needs in that way necessarily if you don't have that background. So these two approaches are based on child-centered play therapy and have developed out of them. And they are manualized approaches and have research basis as well. And so really the crux of it is that we teach the parents and also the teachers the skills that we would normally use as the therapist in the playroom. And the idea behind that is because hopefully teachers and parents have a little bit of a stronger relationship with the child than the therapist who they might see once a week, right? Children see their teachers and their parents every day. And so helping kind of transcend these skills into these environments can be really helpful, because then the child is getting exposure to these positive interactions, more regularly. And it does help the parents and teachers in kind of ways to deal with behaviors and how to respond in ways that help build resiliency and relationship. And so they did have demonstrated increases in ability to demonstrate relationship building skills, and then therefore it reduces behavioral issues in the home and in the classroom. And teachers, after doing this type of training, have felt better able to communicate with their students, better able to attend to their feelings and how to address, hard feelings that might come up in the classroom. Actually are able to feel like they can experience enjoyment when they're with the children rather than maybe stress or burnout. And it helped them to build relationships with individual students, but also the whole class. So they really got to see how the relationships can transfer over and be used in everyday language when you're talking to children. So typically the way these two models work is a child will be given, maybe a half an hour to an hour out of the week where they would get kind of special playtime with their parent or the teacher. And typically the way the research goes is that they choose a child that is particularly struggling in the classroom, for example, and that's the child they focus with, because that's the one that usually needs more relationship and time and attention from the adult. So you have these one-on-one interactions, and we coach the teacher and parent how to use these skills, and then the teachers and parents end up using it throughout their everyday language. And so that's kind of the basis behind these two. And also I'm not sure about the child-teacher relationship training, but I know the child-parent relationship training also is available in a Spanish version. So that's really great too, because there's lots of handouts. It's run like a group setting where the teachers and parents that you're working with meet with you, probably about 8 of them or 6 of them, and you take time to kind of review sessions that they may have had with their children. They bring in some tapes so you can kind of see how they're using these skills with their children. And then there's different kind of, not activities, but I guess talking points and kind of worksheet type things in the manuals that you go through with the participants. I forgot I wanted to share with you this song, so I'm looking it up real quick. But you can see on the slide that really the point of it is to look through the child's eyes and learn through their experiences and see, what are they experiencing and how does that relate to what's going on with them in the classroom maybe. Listening to them, not only with our ears, but really hearing them and watching them. A lot of times their play, of course, can tell us a lot, even without if they don't have that language or capacity to express their feelings in those ways to us. And their world is also through their cultural lens. So that's something that we need to be mindful of as well. Let me see if I got this song pulled up here for you, because I think it's really important in illustrating this point. I'll pull it up so you can hear it.
You've got a big clock, I've got a little clock too. Your clock's for your time, your big clock pushes you. When you're in a hurry, my little clock's pushed aside. You make me use your clock, you don't care about my clock size. When your clock is ticking and everything changes, you haven't got time to explain. I have to use your time, you push me and pull me, and it never enters your brain that you've got a big clock. I've got a little clock too. My clock's for my time. Your clock's time is up to you. Your clock's important. It's bigger, it makes more noise. But my clock's important, though you think it's just a toy. You're only trying to help me feel better, at least that's what you say. But I feel angry, I don't feel better when my little clock's treated this way. Oh, you've got a big clock, I've got a little clock too. I listen to your clock, Please listen to my little clock too. I've only got a little time. Do you have a little time? Little time on your big clock. One from you.
Okay, so normally I like to get feedback about the song and kind of what your thoughts are thinking about the view of the child. So if you could just type some in the chat box, that would be helpful. We can kind of see some of your reactions to that. Usually there's some tears. I was going to say there's usually some tears. Yeah. Yeah, it really makes us think, you know, what is the view of the child? A lot of times we're pushing them to move fast or do something on our time, you know, that we need to hurry. We have these timelines, or in therapy, you know, you need to hurry up and get better, or stop, you know, we need to help you not act that way. The title of the song is called My Little Clock. And I typed it in the chat box for you too. Yeah, social emotional, we forget about our kids' clocks. Yeah, great song to see the child's point of view. So yeah, I just really love that song, and it really does get you to stop and think, you know, what's more important, us finishing this activity on time or getting to this place on time. You know, sometimes we rush them and pop them in the car seat and they have no idea where they're going or what's going on, right? They're just like, okay, you know. And so I think it's just important, if anything, that we get out of this discussion today is just to really stop and think about what's going on with the child's view, and how are we helping them understand what's going on in their world, and how can we help support them through that. Yeah, we need to slow down and smell the roses for sure. So of course, the real focus in this type of therapy is the relationship is seen as the change agent. And so that includes unconditional positive regard. And so what I mean by that is, no matter how the child acts in the session, we're going to really stay matter of fact in our tone and working with them. We're not going to change the way that we treat them because of the way they're behaving in the session. We're really authentic and genuine. And it's really more of a way of being. And when you are a child-centered play therapist or a client-centered therapist, it's really just the way you are in life. You know, it's like you genuinely care about this child, and, you know, the way you interact with a caring, warm sense of being is just the way you are in the world. And that's really what's important. And just to have them feel safe and secure. Yes, just in really listening to the children and recognizing cultural views for sure, because that's their frame of reference. So I just really like this picture. So we need to just kind of visit their world sometimes, especially when we work with children on a day-to-day basis. And so some of you mentioned this in the chat box already, but that, you know, children communicate and learn through play. It's their language, and toys are their words. There's lots of meaning in play. If you just sit back, you know, during unstructured playtime, you can really get a feel for what's going on in the child's world, maybe what's going on at home, or how they perceive the classroom if they're playing school. And the meaning does have to be understood within their cultural context. And so I have the fish and the bird there because something Dr. Landry says that, you know, fish swim, birds fly, and children play. It's just the way it is around the world, right? So no matter where they are in the world, what kind of toys they have access to or not, they're going to find ways to play. You know, with it, whether it's sticks or rocks, or, you know, remember games like kick the can and all these other games that we used to play outside when we didn't have toys necessarily. We just find ways to play and be playful, and it's a way of kind of making sense of our world. And so it's just really important to recognize that. And so in play therapy, it really looks different than adult therapy, but it serves the same purpose. So, you know, children aren't going to be able to sit in a chair and just express their feelings and process them in cognitive ways, right? Because their brain structures aren't there for that yet. They're not able to do that, but they will be able to tell you a lot about how they feel and a lot about what's going on with them just by playing, even if they don't ever address specifically maybe some of the issues that they're coming to us with. You know, sometimes children play out really specific things that have happened, and sometimes they don't. When I was at the shelter, I had a set of twins that came to see me for play therapy. And one of the little boys came in and he played out the scene pretty much to a T that happened with his mom. There was an incident in a car where her boyfriend at the time was kind of, I guess as she was driving, they realized they were kind of being taken away from where they were and secluded. They were traveling to another location to live. And, you know, in the car, things have been increasingly verbally abusive, and they passed a police officer. So she kind of made waves with the car so the police officer would pull them over. And what happened was the police officer ended up arresting her and the boyfriend, and the two little boys, who were, I think, 4 at the time. She had to call like a distant family member that lived in the area because they had traveled from their hometown already to where they were moving, where there was nobody they knew. And which is, you know, a lot of part of domestic violence, seclusion, and power and control. And so then these poor boys were taken with basically strangers that they had no idea who these were to live with them until, you know, the mom was able to get released and whatnot. But you can imagine how traumatic that whole scene was, let alone, you know, probably the violence and things that they've heard before that incident. And the little boy played it out to a T. He had the car, he had the mom, the dad in the car and everything. And so he was able to work through that and process it a little bit through his play. You know, unbeknownst to him, when they play these things out, they're not consciously saying, you know, oh, I'm going to work on this trauma that I experienced and this is what's going to happen. You know, it's just like they just are drawn to the toys and they just play things out because they want to make sense and they feel like it's a safe space to do that. But his brother came in and didn't play anything like that. He did a lot of organizing and you know, structuring building block towers and things like that. And so in my mind, you know, for me, that kind of said maybe he's just trying to make sense of the chaos that's around him right now, and that's his way of control and structure, manipulating the toys in that way. So you can learn a lot, and they're working through a lot of different things, even though it might not look what we want it to look like when we're in the play therapy room. But we really want to kind of give this be with attitude that really tells the child that we hear and see you, we're with you, we understand, and we accept you. And we really seek to think, what is the child thinking, or what are they trying to tell me? And we're really intentional about creating this be with attitude and safe atmosphere. And really, we just want to make them feel like they're safe to express themselves. And like I said, sometimes they'll come out and say things explicitly that happened or that on their mind and they're trying to process because they know it doesn't feel right. But sometimes they're just going to do things subconsciously and work through things with us. And that's also, you know, helpful in working with trauma, in particular domestic violence, because a lot of times in the home they're told, what, don't tell anybody about this. It's a secret. We don't want people knowing this because this will happen to you, you know. So when they're given an atmosphere and provided the toys in a way to work through it, it really can be helpful because we can have a window into maybe what's going on and what they're thinking about. So really from play therapy, this is what children learn: to have self-control, to respect themselves and accept their feelings, respect others, make choices, assume responsibility, which kind of goes hand in hand with the choices, and to be creative and resourceful, you know, that they can do these things, that they can overcome obstacles and problems and issues in their world. And so, you know, it gives them this opportunity. I kind of say it's like, you know, the Superman booth where you can go in and be a certain way and then you come out feeling stronger. That's kind of how it is for children, that they have this safe space where they are in control, or they have this feeling of being in control and in charge, when in most of their world, they're not feeling that way. So I'll stop right here. I'll answer any questions you might have before we get into the categories. And I know this is real specific to therapy, but I will be transitioning it to how you can use it too. Let's see, I just see a question about presenters available to present, conduct training at our programs. I would be interested in doing that actually. I don't know of any other training programs around. I know there's a facility in Spartanburg that trains therapists. I don't know if they go into facilities to train, but that's something that I've been thinking about and been wanting to do. And I would be happy to even do some kind of virtual thing for your facilities. If that's something you're interested in, feel free to email me. I'll have my email at the beginning of the slides and I can type it in the chat box too. UNC Charlotte has been doing some of this through a research grant out of Duke University, partnering with them. I'm not sure how long the grant is or if it's still going on, but I can also give you her information at UNC Charlotte if you're interested, or up closer to that area as well, or if that's something that you want to think about partnering with an institution to get some grant funding, maybe to do some training. Let's see, I think I included this slide about the appropriate age for play therapy, but I can tell you that right now. Typically, play therapy is done for children 2.5 up to 10 years old. So we're really focusing on children that haven't developed that, that frontal lobe capacity yet, that we're really focusing on the children that utilize play a lot for expressing themselves. But there is a lot of research out there that has models been adapted for older children, adolescents, and even in geriatric populations and adults for different issues. So play therapy can really be used across the board in different ways. And really what changes are the materials. And so I guess that's a good segue into what I'm going to be talking about here are the categories of toys. So when we're looking at categories, we're really intentional about the toys that we select. And we say we want to select, not collect the toys, which can be difficult sometimes. But we want to make sure that there's real life toys, so toys that the children would have in their environment that they're able to play with in a lot of the centers. I know the place where my daughter goes to school, they have real life toys. It's kind of more of a Montessori type feel with regard to the materials, you know, the wooden plane type things for the most part. But you're going to have those kind of things. And also, it's important for the real life toys to have things that represent their world in a cultural sense. And so that can range from, you know, diversity in the skin tone of the dolls. It can be the diversity of the foods that you have in the play center kitchen. You know, I like to say I was teaching at a university in Miami, and there in school, my daughter would have rice, beans, and plantains frequently at school. Here, she's never had that, but she has chicken and waffles and, you know, barbecue and things like that. And so it's just funny to think how much culture is in our food, even that we eat. So I think it's important if you have different populations of students in your facilities, in your classrooms, that you would provide those types of representations of the kinds of foods that they might have at home. Even as far as the vehicles, you know, in Miami, I might not have a tractor in my playroom because that's not really something that they're going to see or interact with a lot. But I would want to have maybe a city bus, or when I was at the shelter, I made sure I had a taxi cab because a lot of kids arrived to the shelter in a taxi cab. And for certain, I had police vehicles and things like that because those are things that the children have had interactions with at the shelter. So it's just really important to think about that as well when you're choosing toys for play therapy and working with children. And then we want to give them toys where they can act out and have some aggressive release in the toys. So things that they can punch, like a bot bag, things that they can act out aggressive things with, like alligators or sharks. You see guns and knives in there, which I know some of you will be like, oh, we can't have that. And I understand that reaction, and that's something we often get. But I found, you know, I've done play therapy in schools. When I did my dissertation work, I worked at a Title I school, and we had a toy gun in there, and I explained to the principal and everybody why it was in there. And also at the shelter, you can imagine that can be a sensitive item to have in a playroom as well because of potential exposure to violence and things. But the reasoning behind it is that it gives the children an opportunity to kind of act those things out in a safe space and process through those things that may have happened to them, or things that they're worried about. You know, with all these shooting drills and things like that in the schools, that's, I'm sure, on the children's minds a lot these days. And so just having a space where they can process through that with someone that's trained and it's safe for them to do that is very important. And we do set limits around the use of those items in the playroom such that they're not, you know, pointed at me or other people, you know, like the child or anything like that. So it's kind of a way to provide limits around it, but also give them the opportunity to explore and work through maybe some feelings or questions or thoughts they might be having with regard to those items. And then we want to have creative, expressive, and emotional release things. So things that have no right or wrong way. So these are typically creative arts materials. So blocks, crayons, paint. Kids love to use everyday items. I used to have tin foil, paper plates, paper bags, cotton balls, popsicle sticks, you know, those kind of things in there too for them to use. And we want to make sure that they can express themselves in lots of different ways with those. And really, yeah, as that someone said with as far as sticks and guns and swords. And the other thing is, you know, if a child feels the need that they need to express themselves with that, they're going to go like this, right? Or they're going to build the gun with Legos or a stick or whatever, right? So it's going to be in the playroom, regardless of how we even try to restrict those types of toys in the playroom. So that's a great point too. A piece of toast, yeah. And just some things to keep in mind. I mentioned this already, you know, the culturally diverse aspect, things that are non-mechanical and non-competitive. So we don't really want to have games, books, or puzzles, which I know in your learning environments, those are important to have. So this is not the same. This is a different type of setting. But it is important to not have these things because you don't want children in this safe space to feel less than, or they're not capable, or, you know, those kind of feelings that sometimes come along with if they can't get the puzzle together or they don't know how to read. So we want to kind of avoid those types of feelings in the playroom. Of course, we want things that are durable because of the way they get used sometimes. We want them to be able to test limits in reality in this safe environment and develop their own understanding and self-control. Because when we do set limits around, you know, I'm not for shooting, if they decide to shoot me or not, that's part of learning their self-control, right? Are they going to exhibit self-control and not do it? Or are they going to do it, you know? So it kind of gives them that opportunity to work through that. This is just some pictures so you can get a feel for what it looks like. This is at the shelter where I worked. I was fortunate enough, we transitioned to a brand new shelter while I worked there. So I got to work, you'll see there's a space, a slide where I worked at the older shelter, and this is the new shelter, and I was able to build the playroom through donations and such. So I was really fortunate. But you can see that they're all kind of categorized around each other, or what items might be near things that you know, you might use together, like the tools and the baby stuff and the baby dolls. And you can see it's pretty organized, and you can see all of the materials. So that's important too, because it goes back to this idea of the toys are their words, and we want them to be able to find them easily and know where they're at if they feel the need to express themselves using these toys. So part of the structure and boundaries we build in the playroom is that we actually put the toys away at the end of the session. So it's back in the same spot every time. And that's just by design. So the children, don't feel like, you know, they've expressed all this stuff and now they have to put it away, because that's kind of like negating their feelings in a way. And also it might inhibit them from fully expressing themselves the next time they come, because they're not going to want to clean up the mess, right, if they're doing all this stuff. So they don't feel as free. But also it's important to reduce anxiety and create that safety structure that they know exactly where the things are when they come into the playroom every time. So you can see those. These are just some ideas for the creative arts. And you can see I just put little bits out at a time of things, which is important too, because otherwise, you know, kids will use a whole bag of feathers if you let them, right? Or googly eyes. So it can be important for your budget as well as cleanup also to ration some of the materials. And then this is when I did the play therapy in the elementary school for my dissertation research. And again, this was a lot of teacher donations. I had some research funding, so I was able to purchase some things. But this was a multi-purpose room. And so in this space, I had to set up and then take everything down and put it back out every time I came to do sessions with children. So I wanted to make sure there were things that I could, put away and store pretty easily. Obviously the kitchen stayed out when I wasn't there and such, they have a dollhouse. But other things like this was a desk Carol that was sitting there that I used to place materials. There was a coat rack in there. So I took advantage of it and used that as my puppet area. And you can see the puppet theater I just made out of a trifold board with some scrap fabric and a dowel rod and some white duct tape to match. And that was nice because then, like I said, I could put it away and put it out when they came. And it's important in a play therapy space to have somewhere that children can go behind and like kind of hide, because we want them, to have control over the distance within the room, but also our relationship. Maybe they're not ready for me to see them play with something right now, or, they want some privacy, or maybe they want to tell me something, but they don't want to look at me because it's something hard to share. So that's really important that we have those spaces for children in play therapy. And this is a portable kit. When I worked at the domestic violence shelter, the older shelter, I had to share an office space with an adolescent therapist. And so she wasn't necessarily using these materials like I was. Sometimes I had to use an office space of someone that worked with adults, so they weren't going to have this stuff there. But you can see it's similar. We have a play area with the blanket, and then I have same categories of toys kind of spread out, and I always put them back in the same place. That's why I have a lot of these pictures, is because I would set them up and take pictures so I'd remember where they go. And so that's kind of what this is. And you can see those would all be packed up. I packed them up in that purple container in that bag, actually, that's in the back of the picture there. And sand is very therapeutic in itself. I don't know if any of you are trained in sand tray therapy or sand play, but this is a little bit, the sand tray I had here is a little bit different. It doesn't necessarily have miniatures or figures like you would use in a traditional sense. And actually I've used sand tray with older kids when you were asking about the age range. But they do just love, there's just something really therapeutic about putting your hands in the sand. And, a lot of kids bury things, and that's really symbolic in play therapy too. So it's really important to have that sensory aspect to play therapy stuff too. So any other questions before I get into kind of what the skills are that you would want to use, that we use in the session, but also that you could use in your everyday? Let's wait another minute just in case. It's really hard to do this without any interaction from you all other than the chat box. Yeah, the book I would recommend is the one at the first slide by Dr. Gary Landreth, The Art of Relationship, for sure. If you want to, if I'm able to provide any other kind of like articles or something, I can do that later if there's a way to get those to you. But there are resources at the end of this that I've outlined several articles, and there might be a book or something there. Oh, thank you, Olivia. I'm trying not to rush, but I tend to I could talk about play therapy forever. So I hope I'm not going over too much at a time.
Yes, Jennifer, if you just if you want to send us a document of links or something like that, we can put it with the handouts so that they'll be available if you want to do something like that.
Great, thank you. Okay, so we'll get into the essential skills. So this is actually my daughter, and I'm going to show you just a brief few minutes. I know it's probably going to make me go over the time actually, but I'll show you just a little less than I was going to, so you can just see what it sounds like and looks like. I actually did tape this for Dr. Post at UNC Charlotte. She was teaching the play therapy class this summer, and I gave her a session so she could show it to her students. But let me kind of go ahead. So this isn't really typically what it's going to look like. Now, if you were doing the parent training, of course it would, because they're going to be at home with their toys. But she has a lot more things than I would, as you saw in the playroom, and some things that are different. I'm going to go ahead and play some of this so you can kind of hear what it sounds like, and then we'll talk about the skills, and you can kind of see if you recognize any of them in the video. Hopefully it works. You want to make sure it's okay. You want to take care of it. You're a pet doctor. You know how to take care of pets. Pumping it.
Ooh, it hurts really good.
Oh, it hurts really good. It doesn't look like it's that very good news.
That's just good.
You're showing me the temperature.
Yeah, and this means that it hurts really bad, then really bad than other people.
She's really hurt a lot more than other people are. She doesn't feel well.
Make me, cause she said that she heard her ring and she's sick.
She hurt her wing and she's sick.
Medicine.
You know what to do. You give her medicine. Giving her more.
And I'm gonna check her mouth.
You're checking her mouth.
I'm getting that flashlight to check her mouth again.
You need the flashlight to check it inside her mouth with the light. You're shining it in there. You know how to use it. You want to make sure that part of her is okay.
And it looks like it looked like she was trying to look for food and there was something in her food and she ate it up and nothing got in her mouth.
Oh, so she ate some food and it made her sick. There was something in it that made her sick and hurt.
Yeah, some kind of animal.
Some kind of animal.
Mm-hmm. And it has to be a mouse. It has to be a mouse or a bug.
Some kind of mouse or bug was in there. Made her sick. You're putting some medicine in there. You know how to use those things too.
Mama, can you hold this?
You don't. Okay, I would show you more, but we're not gonna have a lot of time. But you can see how she'll say things and then I'll kind of reframe them in a way that makes maybe a little bit more meaning into it. I didn't reflect a lot of feelings in this session, but that's something that's really important to do too. As I went on, I did it more, but unfortunately we're not gonna have time for that. But funny enough, since the pandemic, we've been home, she's actually been playing a lot, as you can imagine, doctor and taking care of and things like that. So this was kind of a typical thing that she would play. And so that, speaks a lot to the children trying to make sense of their world for sure. So now we're going to talk about the skills. And so you can kind of see. So some of the things I was doing when I was just kind of restating what she said, that's tracking, responding and reflecting the feelings, returning responsibility. I didn't do that in this little clip that you saw, but that's really if they ask you like, what's this for? Or what can I do next? It's like, you can decide, and here you're in charge and you can decide what you want to do next. Esteem building, those were really the responses when I was like, oh, you know what to do, or you know how to do that. And we didn't get into limit setting or choice giving, but I'll get to those in these slides so you can hear kind of what those are. So these are really the skills that I was talking about that we teach the parents and teachers and that you can use in your everyday with children, even when you're not doing sessions. So the tracking is, really just relaying that you can see what's going on or you understand them, you're hearing them, you can clarify, sometimes you reflect things and kids are like, no, that's not it. This is what I meant, and so it helps them understand what they're trying to convey, but also helps you get more clarification. and helps them clarify, like I said, their own understanding. So this is really what it is, labeling things. The little tracking is really simple, what they just did, like, oh, you pick that up and put it in there. And we don't really ever label the objects until the child does, again, to give them that freedom for creativity, because let's say they pick up a pencil and they want to use it as a magic wand. Well, if we call it a pencil, that's kind of deflating their creativity, right? So you'll hear me say a lot of, oh, this and that. Unless the child names it first, then you can call it whatever they call it. And then the big tracking is more kind of what I was talking about, where it brings more meaning. So these are just some examples. You're picking that up, you're hiding that in there so the others are looking for it, you're making them race, you're feeding it and want to take care of it. Responding to feelings is just what it sounds. You're just kind of reflecting what the child said, if they have that vocabulary to say feelings. But a lot of times in the play therapy, it's really reflecting what's symbolically happening and what feelings they're expressing with the toys. And I did work with a boy diagnosed with autism, and pretty much almost for a whole year, he didn't ever talk or talk to me. Eventually he talked through the toys, never talked to me, but I was able to reflect a lot and do a lot of work with him through his play, because this type of therapy doesn't rely on, or interactions don't really rely on them talking to you about things. So it's really cool. And I really like the way that when we do this responding to feelings, that, we can show children pictures of cards, with feeling words on it. But that really teaches them what other people look like when they have feelings. And feelings are really complex, And when you think back to like learning concepts like math, abstract math concepts at this age, we use a lot of manipulatives and hands-on things. And this is kind of similar. A similar way for them to learn about feelings is in the moment when they're feeling that way and expressing it, you're kind of giving them that word for what that feeling is, so they can recognize like, oh, I'm angry. And this is what it feels like to be angry. When you see a picture of somebody being angry, that's not really helping the child understand, what's that feel like for me when I'm angry, and how do I recognize that? So that's really neat. And then what also tends to happen is the parents will report often that children are starting to use these words to reflect how they feel. So instead of just kicking something and stomping off, they'll say, I'm really angry, or I'm really frustrated. And so they do start to use those words outside of the play space, which is, like I said, the cool thing about play therapy. But these are just some examples. And of course, when you're reflecting the feelings, you want that to be, at their developmental level, but also you want to maybe think about, a maybe more complex word that could help expand their vocabulary too. It's funny, my daughter's always going around labeling her feelings, and I'm like, oh, you can tell you're a therapist's daughter, at 2.5 or 3, she's like, I'm frustrated. So it does work. It does help with their expression. This is returning responsibility, having them making choices, using their creativity. And like I gave you the example when they ask for questions, but these would how you would respond. And here you can decide that can be whatever you want it to be. You can choose what you'd like to do. If they're having trouble with something that, they can do, you can say, I bet you can do that. And then after they do it, you're like, oh, see, I knew you could, and kind of give them that affirmation. And so really Dr. Landers says, we do for children what they can do for themselves. We teach them they're weak. And I know for all of us that work with children, we want to teach them that they're powerful and they're strong and empower them. So by using this type of language with children and returning responsibility and doing esteem building, which is the next skill, we can really help instill that in them. So esteem building really emphasizes the process and not the product. So we're not putting a value on it, which I know we're guilty of a lot, me especially being a former teacher, wow, that's awesome, that's great, you're so wonderful. And, it's really talking about the product and not giving them specific feedback. But when we do really give them specific feedback on with a process and their efforts, that can really help build intrinsic motivation and really help them to feel strong and powerful and empowered within themselves. So, these are some examples. You're really working hard on that. You're trying hard. You aren't giving up. You put a lot of effort into that. You know a lot about it. If a child comes up to you and shows you this picture, isn't it wonderful? You say, yeah, you really put a lot of work into that. I can tell you used lots of different colors and made it just how you wanted it to be. And so see how that's a little bit different than maybe how we typically respond to children. At the end, we recognize their accomplishments. So if they're really trying hard and they've been, you know, not doing it, but they're persisting and they get it, then you say, oh, you did it. And so you can kind of see how praise and encouragement appear to do the same thing, but they're a little bit different when we use esteem building. So limit setting. So, you know, we're talking about letting them feel like they're in control, but obviously there's going to be some limits. And I think this is addresses one of the questions I see in the box here. Of course, we're not going to let them dump paint on me or cut the curtains or anything like that, right? And we're not going to let them do things like pee in the sandbox or take off their clothes or things like that. So this is when we do limit setting. And so really with limit setting, we want to give them the opportunity to still express the feeling that they're having. Because a lot of times, you know, when I ask kids, is it okay to be angry? They'll say no, when really it's okay to be angry, but just the way they've learned or they express it isn't appropriate, right? Hitting somebody, breaking things, that's not okay. But it is okay to be angry, and we will feel angry sometimes. And so we're trying to help them learn to express these things in a more acceptable manner. And so this is why we set limits, of course, to help them with self-control, take responsibility, protect ourselves in the playroom from different things, ethical and social acceptable behaviors. And so these are, we call ACT limits. And so even though we're making the limit set clear and we're setting the limit, we're really being understanding and accepting in our tone. You know, just as we would say the sky is blue, we limit the child with this language. And really it's just to provide respect and not really, you'll see when I show you how to use the limits, the ACT, we're really focusing on what the behavior is and not the child, and not having it like a negative connotation. So this would be what it sounds like. So acknowledge the feelings, wishes, and wants. And sometimes when you do that, they'll kind of stop them in their tracks and they'll be like, yeah, you know, I really am feeling that way. And then you can kind of process it from there. But let's say you see a need for a limit. You know, Stephanie, I see you're angry. And then you communicate the limit, but I'm not for hitting. And so that's a little bit different than what we normally say. We say, don't hit me, right? So this is just turning the words around a little bit. But I'm not for hitting. So you're telling them matter of fact what they're not supposed to be doing. And then you give them something they can do. So you can hit the doll and pretend it's me, or you can go hit that pillow to get your anger out. So it's giving them an alternative, because a lot of times in the moment, you know, if you've ever seen the Dan Siegel Flip Your Lid video, if you haven't, I would recommend going to watch it. But it talks about how your brain cortex gets disengaged from your limbic system or your emotional area when you're angry. So that's you flipping your lid. And when you're trying to talk or think, you know, those two aren't not connected. And same with children. So they're not thinking of what's appropriate sometimes in the moment. So us giving them that can be very helpful. And so giving them age appropriate choices, even in the everyday, can be helpful and empowering. You know, you can decide to use crayons or markers today, or you can choose your snack, an apple or an orange. You know, there's still two acceptable choices, but they still feel empowered because they get to decide. And there's a great video called Choices, Cookies, and Kids by Dr. Landreth, where he's speaking to a group of parents. And it's great. I try to let parents watch it. It might even be available for free now on YouTube, but you might have to go to University of North Texas website, the Center for Play Therapy, and that's where you can order it. But he talks about how little choices for little kids and big choices for big kids, because you want children to have that feeling of being able to make choices and that they're capable of making appropriate choices when they start, you know, young, because you don't want their first choice to be, am I going to take this pill or not, when they're a teenager and dealing with those consequences, right? You want them to have had practice and feeling empowered with little choices that they can make every day. And it also helps reduce power struggles, because, you know, it's not us telling them what they can and can't do, but they're deciding what to do. So after you've done the limits a few times, I mean, you still believe that they're going to follow the limit, but if they're still doing the limit over and over and over, and they're still not following the limit, or it's something that's really harmful, then you're going to move to the choices. And this is kind of what it sounds like. If you choose to write on the table again, you choose to put the markers away for today. And so they draw on the table again. So I see you've chosen not to use the marker for the rest of the day, but then we still give them a choice by saying you can choose to put them back in the bin or on the shelf. So it kind of still gives them a little bit of control, but that limit has been set and the consequence has been set. And it's not a power thing of we're imposing this on you or we're taking it away. It's you've chosen that. And I really wanted you to be able to use that marker today, but I'm sorry, that's the choice that you made. And so you can see how it really helps them to take responsibility for that. And of course, we do give the markers back to them the next day in hopes that they will learn from this and have that responsibility and self-control to make a better choice next time. And so if you want to type in the text box, I know I went through those really quickly and I wish I had more time to get really more in depth with things as far as the skills go, but I know we're at our time already. So if you do want to type in there maybe some ideas of how you might be able to use these skills in your setting or teach others in your setting, that would be great. And then I'll answer. I see there's a question in the Q&A box. And I can type the name of the book in here. So while you're thinking of ways that you could use it, I'll go ahead and answer these questions here. Do you play or interact with the child also if they want the server and the customer? Yeah, you play with them, but how you put them in the lead is you use what's called a whisper technique, where you kind of break out of your therapy role and you say, tell me what you want me to do, or tell me what that looks like. And so it's still kind of putting them in control. So it's not your kind of preconceived notion of what it should look like, especially if it's something like they want you to play the mom or the dad or something like that, and you don't want to impose what your idea of that relationship is into the playroom. You want them to kind of guide that. And then of course you would just interact as you would feel comfortable doing. Let's see, I allow them to be in control, but is it okay to not let the child control the toy bag and go through like a Tasmanian? How do you feel about that? Yeah, so there's going to be certain limits that you feel might be appropriate or not. So I have had children when I worked at the shelter, as you imagine, because they had experienced a lot of trauma, that they would come in and create chaos in the playroom, you know, because that's what their world feels like. And so they would, you know, dump the toys all over. So there'd be toys everywhere. So I had quite the cleanup afterwards. And for me, I felt like if that's what they needed, that's what they need. And actually it tells you a lot about their progress if they're coming in session after session, and then finally one session that changes, then for me that says that something within the child has changed, that they've overcome something, that they've been able to cope with something differently. So the ways in which they interact with you in the session, but also the way they use the environment and the toys can express a lot of what's changing in the child or what's going on with the child. And sessions, typically it depends. If they're younger children, sometimes, and it depends on the setting too. Like at schools, I did 30 minutes. At the shelter, I did an hour. If they were younger, like 3, I might do a half an hour twice a week or something like that. But typically at least 30 minutes to an hour, depending on the child and the setting where they're at. I see choices to avoid meltdowns. Yeah, so you can use the choices, the limits. Like I said, even just throughout the day when you're working with the children, reflecting how they feel and doing those esteem building responses can be really empowering and powerful for them. For the choices of toys, the playroom is set up exactly the same way every time for all the children. So they always have the same toys available to them, no matter what child it is. And so it's very important not to really introduce or take out different toys, because then that disrupts kind of that structure and predictability of the playroom, which in turn could increase anxiety and kind of break that sense of security, if that makes sense. But I know that that my time is about up here, and I would love to keep talking, and you're welcome to stay if you can, and I'll just finish up here in a couple minutes. But those are pretty much all my slides, and you all are doing the questions, but you can see there are some references and resources here as well. Let's see, what do you do when the child does not want any choice to have a temper tantrum? Is that what you're asking? If they choose to have a temper tantrum? For me, you know, with my daughter, that's happened, and I'll just reflect a couple feelings, like I see you're angry. I'm just going to stand over here, and when you're ready, I'll be here. And I know that's hard to do when you have a whole classroom of children, so I do understand that. But just giving them that space, trying to reflect some feelings, give them an opportunity to calm down a bit. And then afterwards, you know, we would talk about it. And sometimes that takes a long process and a lot of patience. I understand working with the little ones for sure. And trying to, I guess, think about what the precipitator to the tantrum was, and, you know, kind of reflecting that to the child. Like, I understand you really wanted to play with that toy right now, but now's not the time for playing with that. We can play with it later. Because sometimes they think like, oh, I'm never going to play with it again, right? So even using kind of that ACT language in a way that addresses trying to think about, well, what's causing this tantrum, you know, and try to nip it before it gets kind of to the point where their brain's flipped. Because I know with my daughter, once she's flipped her lid, it's just kind of like, I just have to let it run its course. And then afterwards, we can kind of talk about it and process it a little bit at her level, of course. But good, I'm glad this was helpful. It sounds like a lot of you can take some of these ideas with you. And again, feel free to email me. I'm happy to, like I said, I can talk about play therapy all day if you would like me to come talk about some of this stuff where you're at. And I think that is it. And I just, I guess, turning it back over to Heather.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. That was a lot of information, but very good information. And I hope that you guys are going to be taking some of that back with you. I really appreciate your presentation. I appreciate our live captioner who's been sharing their talent with us so that we can make sure this is accessible. If you have other questions about this session or the symposium or whatever, you can use the email address that's on the screen. It's scic@mailbox.sc.edu. I'm going to launch the evaluation poll, and I'll finish up with a few things. And then I think there's one more question for Dr. Hall, so we'll get to that. If you will complete the evaluation that's popped up on your screen, there are 10 questions, so make sure you scroll down. We really do look at the evaluations and make choices about the direction we want champions to go in based on your feedback. If you are attending this session on your telephone and you need any type of credit, you will need to email the mailbox scic@mailbox.sc.edu and include your name, the session you attended, and the phone number you attended the session with, so we can match you up to your registration. That would be really, really helpful. And there is one more question in the question box. How do you handle a child when the child invites?
Okay, so I'm thinking you're asking when the child invites you to play. Yeah, when the child invites me to play, then yeah, I just interact with them in the way that they're directing me to. And again, if it's unclear kind of what they want me to do or what I can interpret they want me to do, then I would kind of use that whisper technique of tell me what you want me to do. And then usually they're happy to tell you or show you what they want you to do. And the book, The Choices is the video, Choices, Cookies, and Kids. And I just put that in the chat box too for you. So that's the video that Dr. Landreth talks about. And he does talk about the choices, and there's some information about the choices for parents in that CPRT, the Child Parent Relationship Training Manual. And you can get that through UNT also, through the Play Therapy, the Center for Play Therapy is where they sell that as well. And that's the one that has the Spanish version too. And it kind of has a little lesson, I guess, or session, you could say, about choices that you would teach the parents and or teachers about that. I really appreciate you all coming today.
We are getting close to 100% evaluations completed. I think you guys can make it all the way to 100%. If a poll hasn't popped up on your screen, it might be because you have pop-ups blocked, or I don't know, something about cookies. I don't understand all the technological terms, but I can say them. We're almost there, folks. I think Jennifer's answering another question in the chat. Becky, I'm sorry your poll didn't pop up. If you want to provide some feedback, you can email it to me.
I believe too at USC, from my understanding, they have a play therapy program there too, which sounds pretty similar to UNCC if you all are closer there in Columbia.
Well, I'm not seeing any more questions coming through, and so I really appreciate you guys hanging in there a little bit longer. I think it was definitely worth us spending a little bit more time on this topic, and I really appreciate you joining sessions for the 2020 virtual event. We're used to being face-to-face, and I really enjoyed being face-to-face and seeing everyone interacting in the sessions, and we are hoping next year we will get to be together again. Thank you so much, Dr. Hall and our captioner, and Jenny May for helping us monitor chat and Q&A. And I hope that you all have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.